The growing mind and body is the perfect fodder for horror. Blood, sex, bone-breaking transformations, and turmoil, it's all there. From The Exorcist to Alien, we've seen the changing body and often, but not always, the female body utilised as a metaphor and a tool for fear. But beyond this, there is a growing subgenre of films that directly explores coming-of-age stories through the lens of horror. In these stories, we don't observe the horrors. We experience them through the eyes of the protagonist. Often here, the protagonist is the horror, or at least the source of it. So today I want to explore this genre, one that I'm tentatively calling coming of rage, and understand both why we root for teen protagonists even when they're monsters, and where and why we draw the line. I wrote this essay when I was listening to a lot of Chappell Roan and Marina and the Diamonds, and it literally had me typing like... To get this out of the way up front, coming of rage doesn't seem to be a well-established term or something with universal meaning. Wes Craven used the term in 2014 as the title of his comic book series he created with Steve Niles. When describing the comic's inception, Craven said it's about how the central character Richie lost his innocence and became one of the most powerful vampires in the world, and the title would be Coming of Rage. In terms of online sources, the term was also used in 2020 in this blog post and in 2021 in this academic text, the latter referring specifically to stories of black girlhood, like Girlhood, The Fits, and The Hate You Give. Occasionally it's used in a quippy headline reviewing an indie movie, and last year the term was used in the marketing campaign for Zelda Williams and Diablo Cody's 2023 film Lisa Frankenstein. Hello everyone. I just want to note that I am cautious of the possibility that this term has been co-opted from black culture, as has seemingly everything else nowadays, given that the term was used in the title of the 2021 dissertation on black girlhood that I mentioned. As far as I could determine, this isn't the case here, as it was used in other contexts prior to this. However, it does feel important to say because it does happen. And I am open to corrections if this is the case. It also seems, even in the time that I've been working on this video, that this term is being used more commonly, describing both the upcoming films Sweet Pea and Boy Kills World, which both kind of fit the description in this essay. So it definitely is becoming a more popular term even as we speak, and thankfully those articles have not erased the remaining 30 minutes of this video. So yeah, just be aware of that going forward, and let's get back to it. Ultimately, oh no. She's gonna live down there for now. To me, coming of rage perfectly sums up this specific area of horror. Coming of age journeys motivated by anger, fear, and desire that result in horrors. This often looks like transformation fueled by rage, and is set aside from other genre films by using key elements of standard coming-of-age tales like first love, first blood, and bodily changes. Sometimes coming-of-rage stories focus on puberty or metaphors for puberty, like Ginger Snaps and Carrie, but not always. Going through the motions of adulthood and womanhood continue long beyond hormonal puberty. So the subgenre can equally be applied to stories about 18-year-olds, 21-year-olds, 25-year-olds, 30-year-olds who experience the same growing pains of dealing with their emotions, navigating relationships with parents, friends, and lovers, and struggling to connect. The film May by Lucky McKee immediately springs to mind. It is strange girl media through and through, a film about perpetual disconnect and the desire to be understood, themes that fit perfectly in the coming of rage subgenre, but the main character was played by a 29-year-old Angela Bettis. I'm 29, and without infantilizing myself or excusing myself from life's responsibilities, I feel like a baby. At the end of the day, we never stop growing. So that's how I'm using the term coming of rage. And to go even further, I am splitting it into two categories. The first, where the protagonist becomes an evil or poorly motivated person, like Pearl, May, Stoker, and Midsommar. And secondly, there is the category where the protagonist is literally a monster or has a monstrous trait, like Teeth, Ginger Snaps, Jennifer's Body, Raw, The Witch, and Carrie. You may have noticed that all of the protagonists in the films that I just listed are skinny white girls. I did look at a lot of movies in consideration for this video, but I found that within horror specifically, other perspectives weren't really represented in the coming of rage parameters I've outlined. I toyed with Nightmare on Elm Street 2, the gay one, and Donnie Darko, and I wasn't sure if they really fit. I also considered the Predator prequel Prey, which tells a coming-of-age story through the eyes of a teenage Comanche girl in the 1700s. This is such a good movie, and it's probably the closest thing for Native American or Comanche people specifically to this subgenre. But the protagonist, Naru, doesn't really have a rage journey, so I feel like it's more accurate to say it is a literal coming-of-age horror rather than a coming-of-rage. But please do feel free to share any other films that I may not have heard of and therefore haven't included. I'm particularly interested to see if there are lesser known films out there that do represent queer, male, and non-white coming of rage stories. So, to get stuck in to the meat of it, let's start with why this youthful, hormone-addled period of our lives marries so well with horror. As I said in the intro, aspects of puberty like transformation, lust, hunger, and blood all work in perfect harmony with horror. There are instances where these elements are used, like in the aforementioned Alien, just to get under the skin. Alien creator Dan O'Bannon said that he used the imagery of female bodies and male sexual assault because they are the things men fear most. He wasn't intentionally telling a story of womanhood or sexual development. And to clarify, I'm not dismissing the use of this imagery as surface level. It works and it's incredible. I'm also saying that in Alien, the ideas are taken out of context, and that exposes how terrifying something like forced pregnancy is. Alien uses similar ideas to some coming-of-rage stories, but for a different purpose. Again, The Exorcist can be seen as a big metaphor for puberty. She rubs, she swears, she oozes. But I'd set it aside from coming of rage because we're not seeing the experience from Reagan's point of view. Her transformation is a horror for others. The Exorcist would be a totally different film if it was framed from Reagan's perspective, but rather she is the terror that leads a young priest to question his faith. And we get a film that doesn't say anything about coming of age specifically, which again is not a problem, it's just not what this film is trying to do. With all that in mind, coming of rage movies serve a slightly different function to other movies that use similar imagery or experiences, because they're putting us in the protagonist's shoes. We all know from experience that feeling different, feeling changed, feeling confused and out of control is terrifying. Watching yourself become a beast is just as scary, if not scarier, than encountering one. In a few cases, the official rage girl is the secondary protagonist, like in Jennifer's Body and Ginger Snaps, where I'd say Needy and Bridget are our insert POV characters, but we still get a strong sense of Jennifer and Ginger's perspectives. They're far from just an obstacle. Also, finally watching Ginger Snaps for the first time is one of the things that inspired me to make this video, and it was so good, and I'm so annoyed at myself for not watching it sooner. I was gonna say Ginger Slaps. That's so lame. Cut the cameras. The loss of innocence is a particular element of growing up that also goes hand in hand with horror. Loss of innocence is seen in so many horror films, even if it has no thematic significance, as often protagonists are exposed to horrors unknown before, inadvertently changing them or breaking their spirit. Putting the spotlight on loss of innocence as a theme really allows the filmmaker to make the most of this naturally occurring element in the horror genre. Another key element of coming-of-age films is how they present the experience of young women as opposed to young men. We associate female puberty and therefore femme coming of age with pain, blood, heartbreak, sexual violations, betrayal, and secrecy. Many girls know the horror of waking up in the night and getting the shock of your lives when you turn on the light to see that everything is covered in blood, from your sheets to the walls to your thighs. It's a moment straight out of a slasher or possession movie. Lycanthropy feels like it has a natural link to menstruation and puberty because of the moon cycle. Our hormones bring on monthly mood swings and bloody encounters, as well as developing body hair and increased hunger. Slightly different, but a few people have asked me to talk about the video Bloodborne, and I'm not a gamer, so I wouldn't even know where to start in playing and dissecting it. But I love the imagery and ideas it presents, and there is a brilliant video that I have to recommend about Bloodborne and femininity by Honeybat. She gets way more into these ideas, and I'd highly recommend watching. The horror of 2007's Teeth is dentata. The thing she and the men she encounters are so terrified of is literally her and sure, she has a few teeth down there, but even without the teeth, are pretty gnarly. I've had one for years and it still gives me a fright from time to time. Dawn's tussie could of course be a more general metaphor for bodily abnormalities or changes, and the real antagonists of the film are the people. But taking it at face value, the is the monster. Teeth and its traumas are so specific to AFAB biology. All that said, the horror genre is already renowned for its leading ladies and final girls, which makes it even easier to integrate these ideas and themes. Often popular coming-of-age stories for boys focus more on awkwardness and grossness in a way that pushes them into the category of teen comedies and sexual misadventures. There are, of course, some amazing coming-of-age stories with male protagonists, like Perks of Being a Wallflower, Billy Elliot, and Dead Poets Society, that lean a lot darker. And I'm sure there are plenty more examples, but bigger picture, I still think they are a minority when it comes to telling stories about teenage boys. I may be wrong there, and I'm totally open to opposing opinions, so please discuss. But I'd argue that this is why we have less of an association between male adolescents and horrifying subject matter, making them a less obvious choice for coming-of-age stories. So with all that in mind, let's actually talk about some of our coming-of-age protagonists. I'm eager to explore how we interact with her, beginning with, why do we like her? These stories are growing ever more popular and are beloved by so many people, whether you are a teen or an adult, male, female, queer, trans, NB, whoever. The answer to why is pretty obvious: because we relate to them. Many people see themselves in coming-of-age protagonists, even though they are sometimes absurdly monstrous, out of touch, or even evil. And within this too, there are a multitude of reasons. Huge broad sweep, but I think a lot of people who relate to horror in general have felt like they're not understood or like outcasts in their lives. And the weird worlds of horror make us feel seen and understood. Sometimes the evil on show is even a healthy outlet for people to release anger, frustration, and hatred. Although, caveat, horror is so much less a counterculture these days, and it's impossible to really tell who is a horror fan and who isn't. Just because someone wears a 9 Inch Nails t-shirt to school every day and barely utters a word doesn't mean their favourite film is going to be The Crow, and likewise, just because someone is the captain of the rugby team, it doesn't mean Eric Draven isn't their idol. Even if you've never overtly been an outcast, when we relate to fiction, we often draw from our insecurities and traumas and see them as more exaggerated than others see them. Basically, a lot of people feel like outcasts, and a lot of of these protagonists, bar maybe Jennifer Check, are outcasts themselves. Mild spoilers for all of the movies that I mentioned earlier. Thomasin's family literally thinks she's a witch. Lisa is a little weirdo with an eerie backstory. Danny is isolated by her grief. Pearl is isolated by her family. Carrie is a victim of bullies. Justine is a timid newbie. Dawn is ridiculed for her abstinence. They're all outcasts in one way or another. We also find it easy to relate to coming-of-age stories, as many of them are set during high school or the protagonist's teen years. Most of us know what high school is like. We've all been or currently are a teenager, so we've dealt with changing for a gym class, staring down the corridor at an unrequited crush, or dodging bullies. Even if high school has long since passed, it's easy to be taken straight back to that place mentally and to see our own experiences echoed. Our love of the Rage Girl is not always based on directly seeing ourselves in her though, and is sometimes more of an aspirational affection. I can't relate to Jennifer Check of 2009's Jennifer's Body because I was not, and never have been, an entrancing man-eater, but I dream of what it's like to have that beauty and command over people. I'm evolved enough to know that being beautiful doesn't inherently make your life any easier, but it doesn't stop me from seeing Jennifer Check as the kind of girl I wanted to be when boys made me feel like shit. 2024's Lisa Frankenstein, starring the vastly underrated Kathryn Newton and the rated Cole Sprouse, presents a protagonist who is aspirational in a completely different way. Not because she's beautiful and popular within the context of the film, but because of the boldness with which she dresses and jokes and prioritizes herself. Speaking personally again, she's the kind of character I think closest represents me as an adult. And therefore I look at this character who was a teenager and think that was who I could have been if I'd known myself a bit better at that age. Lisa has a level of self-expression and shamelessness to her that I still aspire to. She does, however, become kind of a shitty person over the course of the film, which I do not aspire to. But we will talk more about that later in the video. On top of relating to Rage Girls because of who they are, we also relate to them based on their actual experiences. From rage to jealousy to desire and disgust to self-hatred to vengefulness and naivety, this is the teen girl charcuterie board from which we have all tasted. And while it all feels so personal and shameful when you're going through it, there's almost a universal, standardized set of feelings and experiences we go through during this time in our lives. So, we get the Rage Girl, we love her, we are her, but what are the limitations of this trope? How far does she have to go into monstrous territory before she loses us? Many coming-of-age protagonists do some pretty dark shit. They're in horror after all, so of course there is plenty of murder, mutilation, and cruelty. But what are the limitations of this? Are we rooting for her when she directly harms someone? Are we rooting for her when she eats a baby? Are we rooting for her if she kills another beloved character? Basically, what does she have to do that's bad enough to stop us from being on her side? As I said earlier, Lisa Frankenstein has been one of my favourite films of the year, but it does have some issues, in my opinion, with the writing of its leading lady. Lisa Swallows, hilarious name, kooky girl, accidentally summons a corpse back to life and goes on a fun misadventure in order to piece his body back together, while also experiencing her own journey of romance and self-empowerment. She accidentally but guiltlessly murders a few people with the help of the creature, and this is where I had some issues with the characterization. A few characters in the movie kind of deserve what's coming to them in a fun 80s camp way. Her stepmom is an insufferable narcissist with no respect or real affection for Lisa, and there's one guy who tries to touch her while she's too drunk to say no. But other people in the movie suffer at her hands for pretty flimsy reasons, like flirting with her but not actually liking her, or being an interfering cop, which seems to be a classic collateral damage character in these movies. Lisa never realizes she's in the wrong about anything or questions what she's doing, and the movie ends with her deciding to die to be with her corpse BF. I loved this character so much to start with, but her increasingly self-righteous and self-indulgent actions didn't leave me feeling so hot on her by the end. It's a fun movie, so none of the murder feels that deep, but I kind of wasn't on her side in that last third because I was like, Lisa, get your shit together and grow up. Whether Lisa's attitude is enough to stop you from supporting her is very subjective, but sometimes a rage girl's actions are unquestionably not okay. In Ginger Snaps, one uncomfortable scene sees Ginger effectively begin to assault someone as she ignores constant no's. She does stop before getting to a sexual act, but is that the line where a rage girl goes too far? Or do we see this as part of her struggle with insatiable hunger and desire? I think in some ways it is this point in the film where her switch into monsterhood really begins. And to make it really clear, I'm not saying that anyone in real life is a monster who has made mistakes, understands why they're wrong, and is apologetic for them. I'm the biggest believer in rehabilitation over shunning people for what they have done wrong. But again, just in the context of this film, this is the point at which we stop rooting for Ginger on some level. The movie signals to us morally, with an objectively bad action, that it's time to let her go. She's not our Ginger anymore, which is why we really have Bridget as the core protagonist that we're able to continue seeing ourselves in. Ari Aster's Midsommar is a really interesting example to analyse when asking the question of how far a rage girl can go because of how divisive Danny's final decision is. Big spoilers ahead. We spend the movie rooting for her, hoping nothing bad will happen to her. So when Danny doesn't really learn and heal and instead embraces her vengeful, delusional instincts, it's a bit of a shock. Yes, she's unscathed. The whole May Queen thing wasn't some big setup to sacrifice or harm her. However, she becomes the harbinger of someone else's suffering. And a lot of people did not like that as a message to end on. The context of Danny and Christian's relationship seems to be what a lot of this audience anguish is based on. Christian is an abysmal boyfriend. He neglects her but won't cut her loose, omits important information to the point of lying, diminishes her problems, etc., etc. He is not abusive. Some people might argue that he is, but I have done a small amount of work with domestic violence prevention, and I believe Christian's actions would not be seen as coercive control or intentional harm. But importantly, relationships don't need to be abusive to still be harmful. And the relationship between Danny and Christian no doubt undermines Danny, diminishes her self-worth, and leaves her feeling isolated and unstable. Bare minimum, we can agree that Christian sucks. But is he deserving of being paralyzed, sewn into a bear carcass, and burned alive? In a real-world context, no. Of course, plenty of people still do root for Danny within the context of the movie, and we can, because it's a movie. As Aster says, it's a fairy tale. It is fiction. It is a fantasy. No one saying Christian deserved it is going to turn around in real life and push their ex into the Christmas bonfire. Hopefully. But the ending does show where the line is for some people. Christian was not pure evil, and honest. I can't with the way I keep saying evil. Evil. Christian was not pure evil, and by the end, for most viewers, we feel pretty bad for him and aren't rooting against him in a way that justifies his horrible end. I love the ending of Midsommar, but am I still in support of our protagonist? Not really. I'm asking a lot of rhetorical questions in this section. That was poor writing on my end. Park Chan-wook's Stoker is another one that pushes its protagonist too far for me to follow her, as, spoiler for the ending, ding ding ding, jump down here, it ends with Rage Girl India killing an innocent policeman who pulls her over. The murder wasn't justified by revenge or even empowerment. She's just a messed up person who has now embodied the behaviours of the film's greater evil. And I actually found that to be a really bummer note for the film to end on. Call me crazy, call me Mother Teresa, but I do not like killing people who don't deserve it. And while we don't need to take actions within fiction that seriously, there are a million conversations on media literacy that touch on this, there might still be a point in a movie where a character's actions actually make you feel uncomfortable, which can genuinely stop you from enjoying the film. Midsommar definitely seemed to have that effect on some people, and I find Stoker had that effect on me. In a slightly different case, May includes a lot of murder, and not all of those people deserve it, even in film context. But I think it surpasses the need for us as viewers to agree that anyone deserved to die. It works because the lead character, May, is so disillusioned and depressed that we understand that she sees no other way. They're not empowered kills, they're desperate. She's so lonely and longing to be seen, so we continue to support her as a character, not because we're like, yeah, but because we feel sorry for her. We want her to get what she wants. So I definitely don't think murder is too far for the Rage Girl, but who and why makes a pretty significant difference. My final limitation of the Rage Girl is when they transcend visible girlhood, when they become unrecognizable. To look again at Ginger, the more tainted her character gets, the more she experiences physical transformation, becoming a slimy, hairy werewolf with no resemblance to her former self. This isn't the only reason we stop rooting for her, as we've discussed, but it may contribute to us feeling dissonance or creating a further emotional distance from Ginger. Pretty much all of our other Rage Girls stay beautiful and feminine, if mildly disheveled. And even if they do have physically grotesque moments, like Jennifer eating raw chicken on the kitchen floor and spewing black vomit, these don't tend to be the moments we idolize. Obviously, our relationship with Jennifer Check is more complicated than this because we are all smarter than that. But broadly speaking, it's the physically beautiful version of Jennifer who is featured most in our Tumblr posts and fan edits. And yes, I am still on Tumblr, and it's my little safe haven. Overall, I think as a counter to why we like her, we stop rooting for the Rage Girl when she loses that relatability. Whether that's because she gets annoying and self-important and we don't want to see ourselves in her, because she does something unforgivable or harms an innocent person, or because she becomes unrecognizable physically. The big question at the end of all of this is what we actually want for the Rage Girl when we say we're rooting for her. I've said the word root, which in Australia and New Zealand is a word of sexual nature, so many times in this flipping video. I'm rooting for you. When we watch the Rage Girl's journey, are we rooting for her to reject or embrace evil? A horror protagonist doesn't always need their own emotional journey, but I think in Coming of Rage specifically, it is something that we look for. To harp on the puberty thing again, transformation is so key to this genre, so I think characters can't just stay the same. As I mentioned before, the ending of Lisa Frankenstein was kind of a flop for me. Lisa's emotional journey is much less of an arc and more of a slope, as she never has a significant redeeming moment or a realization that she got carried away. And I'm not saying I want the character to be good again, but I want them to feel human in some way, if only for a moment. Lisa Frankenstein lacked the cathartic energy to make a full pivot to evil work, but it can work. Interestingly, looking at the character arcs in the 11 movies I'm analysing for this video, all of them end with our girl doing evil or embracing the monstrous. I think these stories work best when our character has at least a period of self-reflection and analysis and actively chooses to take that path. In Pearl, we see all of this self-reflection laid out in the incredible 7-minute monologue by my Oscar winner Mia Goth. This is truly one of the best horror performances ever, and the dialogue is an overflowing insight into Pearl's psyche that allows us to understand why she then does what she does. We want Pearl to go buck wild because we know that that's what she needs to get her feelings out. Likewise, Thomasin actively choosing to enter a coven is one of the best horror endings of the last decade. Given the consistency of these dark endings, I don't think we're really rooting for our Rage girls to be good. Films are a place for us to indulge in fantasy, and I don't think we want or need to see these characters turn away from evil. In part, I feel this comes down to who we're rooting against. We root for Danny to sacrifice Christian because he's the shitty, neglectful boyfriend. We root for Dawn because she's dispatching sexual abusers. We root for May because people constantly reject her. We root for Jennifer because she's eating boys. We root for Thomasin because her family has condemned her. On-screen antagonists often mirror the people in our lives that we wish somewhere deep down we could ruin. Sometimes as a matter of revenge, and sometimes simply to move on in a world without them. So if our Rage Girl championing evil means she's strong enough to destroy the antagonists, we want her to champion it. It's not always about rooting against someone. Raw, for instance, doesn't take this route, in my opinion. But I think when these despicable characters are present, we tend to be gunning for their downfall at the hands of our Rage Girl, the stand-in for ourselves. Finally, I think for the most part, we want her to embrace evil because often it's evil that is actually representative of adulthood. All the blood, all the pain, all the destruction, and all the rage was worth it because she's grown. She's been transformed by it into something new. The challenges along the way are the puberty of horror, and surviving it means you've come of rage. Horror is the most beautiful breeding ground for stories about transformation, growth, and pain. Growing is painful no matter what age and stage of your life you're at. Whether it's the physical pain of a violated or changing body or the emotional pain of rejection, loss, or betrayal, there are constant horrors that we experience in adolescence and young adulthood. But these horrors transform us for better or for worse into the version of ourselves we need to be to take on the world. And these films give us the space to watch girls become literal man-eaters and murderers, embracing their darkest urges and their place as outsiders in order to survive. We see ourselves in coming-of-age stories because we too know the pain of growing and know how much darker the world becomes once you cross that line. And that is that. I hope I'm not causing destruction by calling this subgenre coming of rage. And maybe I'm being delusional and this is already a thing. Thank you so much for watching. Goodbye.
I think I just want to make it more clear that
coming of rage
is a genre.